He pressed the needle into the IV bag in under 4 seconds. Smooth, practiced, like a man who had done it before and never lost sleep over what came after. 30 milligrams of potassium chloride, colorless, tasteless enough to stop a human heart, in 11 minutes without leaving a mark any coroner would question. He set the bag back on the counter, capped the needle, and walked to the corner seat in the waiting room like a man with nothing to do and all night to do it. Captain Liam Reed's ambulance was still 4 minutes out. Dead men didn't survive emergency rooms. Tonight, that would finally be proven true. If that just made your blood run cold, hit subscribe right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me because it gets worse before it gets better. Clara Jenkins had not taken a sip from her coffee cup in 40 minutes. That was not unusual for a graveyard shift. What was unusual was that she could not remember putting the cup down, could not remember where she had last set it, and the moment that gap in her memory surfaced, something cold moved through her that she could not immediately name or explain. She filed it away. She had 11 years of filing things away. At 3:22 in the morning, St. Jude Memorial's emergency room held the specific silence of a place that had briefly run out of disasters. Clara had worked enough graveyard shifts to know that silence was not peace. Silence was the held breath before the scream. She was standing at the nurse's station reviewing labs when she first clocked him. Corner seat, dark jacket, no check-in paperwork, no visible injury, no phone, no restlessness. Just a man sitting with his spine straight and his hands loose in his lap, watching the ambulance bay entrance with the kind of focused patient attention that did not belong to anyone waiting for a doctor. Clara had spent 11 years reading people the way other women read novels, and this man was a story she did not like the first sentence of. She was still watching him when the radio on the desk burst open. Trauma incoming, ETA 3 minutes, adult male mid-30s, shrapnel wound left thigh, 4 days infected, sepsis indicators, climbing fast. BP is 80/48 and dropping. He is conscious and he is fighting us. A pause filled with engine noise and controlled urgency. He also has a military working animal. The handler will not allow separation under any condition. Just be ready. The charge nurse, Sandra Morrow, looked up. A dog. He stays, Clara said. She wasn't looking at Sandra. She was still looking at the corner seat. I'll take primary. She moved, and she told herself the feeling crawling up the back of her neck was just the shift, just the hour, just the silence before the inevitable noise. She told herself that right up until she pushed through the double doors and felt, rather than heard, the corner of the waiting room shift behind her, the soft sound of a man adjusting his position, recalibrating, refocusing. Watching where she went. The ambulance bay doors blew open at 3:26, and Clara's first real look at Captain Liam Reed told her 3 things simultaneously. He was bigger than any man had a right to be on a gurney. He was in considerably more pain than he was allowing his face to show. And he was looking at every single person in that bay and calculating something behind eyes that were gray and flat and absolutely awake in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with training. Beside the gurney, moving in exact unison with its wheels not leashed, not caged, not frightened, was the dog. The Belgian Malinois hit the doorway and stopped. Not because anyone stopped him. He stopped himself, and he swept the entire room in one long, slow arc, every face, every doorway, every shadow. And Clara had the sudden disorienting sensation of being assessed by something that was significantly better at it than she was. Havoc, Liam said from the gurney. One word. Quiet. The dog's eyes came back to him immediately and stayed. His name is Havoc, one of the paramedics confirmed, slightly breathless. He held up his arm. The sleeve was torn clean through at the forearm. The skin beneath was unbroken. That was a warning, first and only one he gave. Clara looked at the tear in the fabric. Then she looked at Havoc. The dog was already looking at her. Captain Reed, she said, stepping alongside the gurney. Clara Jenkins, I'm your nurse. Pain level 1 to 10. 7. His voice was low and precise, shaped by years of needing to be heard clearly in places where clarity was the difference between living and not. Tell your doctor the dog stays. I need that settled before anything else. It's settled. He turned his head and looked at her directly for the first time. Something in his face shifted, not softness exactly, but a slight release of a tension she hadn't noticed until it moved. You didn't even hesitate. You can hesitate or you can treat a BP of 80/48, Clara said. I don't have time for both. Something that was almost a smile crossed his jaw. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were already scanning the corridor ahead. Dr. Marcus Hale was gloved and ready when they brought Liam through the trauma bay door, and he lasted approximately 12 seconds before his eyes landed on Havoc. No, Sam, he said. ADA, Clara said, not stopping her movement toward the supply cabinet. This is a sterile. He is a trained service and medical alert animal, which under federal regulation cannot be excluded from a medical facility on the basis of general policy. She pulled the wound cart with one hand and pointed to the far wall with the other. He will stand there and he will not move unless Captain Reed moves. That is a guarantee, not a request. She turned and met Hale's eyes. We have a patient in early septic shock, doctor. Clock is moving. Hale's jaw tightened. He looked at Havoc. Havoc looked at him with the tranquil, absolute patience of an animal that had faced considerably more frightening things than an offended physician. If it contaminates a single surface, Hale started. He won't, Liam said from the table. Quiet, certain, the finality of a man who had never once needed to say anything twice. Havoc crossed to the wall Clara had indicated, sat and fixed his eyes on Liam's face. He did not move again. He did not look at Hale, at the equipment, at anything else in the room. Clara worked. Her hands moved with the specific, unfussy efficiency of someone whose competence lived in her body rather than her mind. She found the vein on the first pass, started 2 large bore IVs, drew the blood cultures, and when she pulled back the field dressing over the thigh wound and saw what 4 days of infection and movement and refusal to stop had done to the tissue beneath, she kept her face completely still. This happened 4 days ago, she said. Statement, not question. Yes, you waited 4 days. I thought I could manage it. You nearly managed yourself into a body bag. She kept working her voice level. What happened? Liam was quiet for 3 seconds. Then somebody put an IED outside my front door. Havoc found it before it detonated. I got out, took a piece of shrapnel in the thigh. He pulled me to the truck, and we have been moving since. Clara's hands did not stop, but her mind stopped hard and fast, and then started again faster. Someone put a bomb outside your house. Yes. And instead of going to a hospital, you drove for 4 days. I drove for 3. On the 4th day, I realized the infection was going to kill me before they did, and I made a different calculation. He said it the way someone else might describe changing their grocery list. No self-pity, no drama, just the clean accounting of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by the violence in the world around him. Who is they? She asked quietly. He looked at her for a moment. People who believed I retired quietly, he said. They were incorrect. Havoc made a sound, not a bark, not a growl, something deep and low that rose in his chest and stopped like a door opening onto a room no one wanted to enter. Every head in Trauma Bay 1 turned toward him. The dog was not looking at Liam anymore. He was looking at the narrow rectangular window set into the upper half of the Trauma Bay door. His ears were fully forward. His body had not moved from the wall, not 1 inch, but every muscle under his coat had gone rigid in a way that transformed his stillness from calm into something else entirely. The stillness of an animal that has located a threat and is deciding. Havoc, Liam said. His voice had changed completely. Every trace of the managed exhaustion was gone. What replaced it was flat and sharp and very, very quiet. Report. The dog looked at him, then back at the door, then at Liam again. Someone's in the corridor, Liam said. He was already pushing himself up on one elbow, EVs pulling. Don't let me. You are not sitting up, Clara said, and she put her hand on his shoulder and pushed, and she was startled by how much resistance she met even now. Even like this, the man was built for something other than compliance. Liam, you will tear the IV and you will go into crisis. Let me look. Clara, stay down. She walked to the door, kept her body to the side of the window, and looked through the glass into the corridor. The man from the corner seat was standing in the hallway. 12 feet from the door, not moving. His right hand was inside his jacket. Clara's heart rate did something she had not felt since her first mass casualty event, a sudden sickening drop followed by a surge that she had to physically breathe through. She stepped back from the window. She turned to face the room and made herself speak at a normal volume. "There is a man in the corridor who I believe has a weapon," she said. "I need everyone to stay calm and stay in this room." Hale stared at her. "What did you just—" "Sandra." Clara grabbed the wall phone. "Sandra, I need security to Trauma Bay 1 right now. Right now. There is an individual in the corridor outside Bay 1, male, dark jacket, right hand inside his clothing. Treat this as an active threat." She set the phone down before Sandra could respond and turned back to the room. Liam was watching her with an expression she could not fully read. Not fear, not surprise, but something deeply specifically focused. Like a man whose mind had already moved 3 stages past the current moment and was working backward to make sure she caught up. "How many security officers does this hospital have on Graveyard?" he asked. "2, she said. "Maybe 3. "Armed?" "No." He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, open to them. "He is not alone," he said. "Whoever sent him does not send one. There will be at least 1 other in this building, possibly 2. They will have mapped the exits before they came in." He paused. "What is above us?" "Second floor is radiology. Currently no staff. It's down for maintenance overnight." "And below?" "Basement, freight access, laundry and utilities." Liam was quiet for a moment, and Clara recognized with a clarity that frightened her that he was not frightened. He was planning. He was lying on an emergency room table with a septic wound and 2 IVs in his arm, and his blood pressure was catastrophically low, and he was planning. "Clara," he said, "come here." She came. She stood at the rail of the gurney, and he looked at her with those gray, certain eyes. "Do you trust your own instincts?" he asked. "Yes," she said, without hesitating. "Good, because in about 4 minutes, those instincts are the only thing in this room that is going to matter." He glanced at Havoc. The dog was still facing the door. Still rigid, still tracking something beyond the glass that none of the humans in the room could hear. "He hasn't broken alert. That means the man in the corridor hasn't moved. He's waiting for something." Liam's eyes came back to hers. A signal, or a person. "What person?" Liam looked at her steadily. Steadily and without hesitation, and with something behind it that Clara could not name. Something that felt like the edge of information she was not yet ready for. "Someone already inside this room," he said. "May not be who they said they were when they came in tonight." The words landed in the center of Clara's chest like something physical. She looked at Hale, at the orderly near the door, at the second nurse standing pale and still against the far wall, at the tray of supplies she had pulled not 10 minutes ago, at the IV bags hanging above Liam's arms, at the coffee cup she could not remember putting down. She moved to the supply counter in 3 steps and picked up Liam's IV bag, the one already running, the one already dripping steadily into his bloodstream, and held it up to the light. The fluid inside was not clear. There was a faint, almost imperceptible cloudiness in the center of the bag. The kind of thing you would not see unless you were looking for it directly. The kind of thing that looked like nothing. The kind of thing that was not nothing. Clara pulled the line, fast, clean. Her hands were not shaking. "He's already in here," she said quietly. "Not to the room, to Liam. He was already in here before you arrived." Havoc turned his head away from the door. He looked at Clara, and then he did something she had never seen a dog do. He looked at the IV bag in her hand and then back at her face with a slow, deliberate certainty that felt less like animal instinct and more like confirmation, like he had known all along and had been waiting for her to figure it out. The corridor outside went completely dark. 3:29 in the morning. Clara did not put the IV bag down. She held it in both hands and stared at the faint cloudiness suspended in the center of the fluid, and her brain moved through 3 separate thoughts in the space of 1 breath. First, someone had tampered with this bag before it was ever hung. Second, it had been running into Liam's bloodstream for 11 minutes. Third, she did not yet know how much had already gone in, or what exactly had been added, or whether 11 minutes was already too long. Talk to me, Liam said from the table. His voice had dropped to something very low and very controlled, the voice of a man who had learned that panic was a luxury that got people killed. What is it? Your four was compromised, Clara said. She was already moving to the second bag, the backup line in his right arm. She checked it, held it up, looked hard at it in the light. Clear, untouched. She left it running and clamped the contaminated line in one motion. Someone got to your bag before you were admitted, before you were even brought in. The room had gone very quiet. Hale had not moved from his position near the monitor. The second nurse, a young woman named Priya, who had been on shift less than 6 months, was pressed against the far wall with her eyes moving between Clara and the door. The orderly, a broad-shouldered man named Dale, who had worked St. Jude nights for 3 years, stood near the supply cart and said absolutely nothing. Clara noted all of it. She noted especially the silence. How long was it running? Liam asked. 11 minutes. He processed that without any visible reaction. What was in it? I don't know yet. I need to get this to the lab. She sealed the bag, labeled it with the time and her initials, and turned to face the room. I need everyone to be very clear about something right now. No one in this room administered that bag except me. I hung it from the emergency supply cabinet on the left side of this bay. That cabinet was unlocked. She looked at Dale. Was anyone in this bay before we brought Captain Reed in? Dale opened his mouth, closed it. I mean the bay was prepped by, he stopped. By who? Clara said. The prep tech on at midnight, Dale said slowly. A guy named Oren. He's only been here about 3 weeks. I didn't see him actually leave the bay after he set up. Liam's hand came down flat on the gurney rail. Not hard, deliberate. His name is not Oren, he said. Everyone looked at him. The people who send someone like this do not use real names. They do not make mistakes with timing. He pushed himself up on one elbow despite Clara's sharp look. They have been inside this hospital for at least 3 weeks. That means they knew I was coming here before I knew I was coming here. He let that sit for exactly 1 second, which means my movements were tracked. My truck, my phone, or someone I trusted. Clara looked at Havoc. The dog had not resumed his position against the wall. He was standing now squarely in the center of the room, his head moving in slow increments, door, orderly door, Hale door, working the room the way a soldier worked a perimeter. He's still alerting, Clara said. Yes, Liam said, because the threat did not leave, it repositioned. He looked at Dale. Where would someone go in this hospital if they needed to move between floors without using the main elevator or the staff stairwell? Dale blinked. The freight corridor, behind the laundry, but that's locked. Supposed to be. Liam looked at Clara. It isn't, he said. Not tonight. 3:31. Clara picked up the wall phone again. Security had not arrived. She called the operator and got a busy signal. She called Sandra at the nurse's station directly. The phone rang 7 times and no one picked up. She set the receiver down very carefully, the way she set things down when she was working hard not to show what she was feeling, and turned to face Liam with her hands flat on the counter behind her. Security is not coming, she said. No, Liam agreed. They're not. Sandra is not answering. Clara, his voice did not rise. It never rose. That was she was beginning to understand the most frightening thing about him. Not the size, not the training, not the wounds he had survived, but the absolute steadiness. A man who had been this close to death this many times that it no longer changed his voice. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to not argue with the first part of what I say. I don't argue, she said. You argued with Hale for 45 seconds about the dog. That was advocacy. Something crossed his face, not a smile, but the shadow of one fast and genuine and gone before it fully arrived. I need you to get everyone out of this room except yourself, he said. Hale Priya Dale. Out. Through the back corridor, not the main one, and into the pediatric wing on the east side. That wing is self-contained, separate ventilation, separate power grid. It is the safest position in this building right now. And you, she said. I cannot walk without the prosthetic, he said. And the prosthetic is in the ambulance. The words landed. Clara absorbed them without flinching, but it took more out of her than she allowed her face to show. A man with one leg, a septic wound, a compromised IV, and a blood pressure that should have put him unconscious 20 minutes ago. And he was the most dangerous person in this room. Havoc can move, Liam said. I can direct him, but I need you to stay because I need someone with hands. He paused. And because you pulled that AV bag before it finished, which means you are already on their list whether you want to be or not. Hale stepped forward. Now just a moment. I am the senior physician on this floor, and I will not be directed to relocate by a... Dr. Hale, Clara's voice cut across his with a precision that stopped him mid-word. There is an armed man in this corridor, a second individual who infiltrated this hospital 3 weeks ago and tampered with this patient's medication and a security detail that is not responding to calls. You have 2 options. You walk to the pediatric wing right now, or you stay in this room and take your chances. She held his gaze. I strongly recommend the first option. Hale stared at her, then at Liam, then at Havoc, who had chosen that precise moment to look at him directly with that flat, patient, utterly unblinking attention. Hale left. Priya followed immediately. Dale hesitated in the doorway, looked at Clara and said quietly, "You sure about this?" "No," she said honestly. "Go." The door clicked shut. 3:33. The room had never felt larger or smaller at the same time. Clara turned to face Liam and found him already watching her with an expression that was difficult to interpret, respect, she thought, and calculation, and something underneath both of those things that was purely human and purely exhausted. "Tell me what you need," she said. "2 things," he said. "My blood pressure is dropping. I can feel it. My vision is going soft at the edges, which means we have maybe 15 minutes before I become a liability instead of an asset. So first, whatever you can do in the next 5 minutes to stabilize me enough to stay conscious and functional, do it." "Done." "Second thing. Havoc is going to alert when the door moves," he said. "Not if, when, and when he does, I need you to be behind the gurney, not beside it, not in front of it, behind it." Why? "Because the gurney is steel framed and they are going to come through that door fast." Clara moved to the medication cabinet and unlocked it with her badge. Her hands were steady. She found the norepinephrine, calculated the dose in her head without writing it down, prepared the push with movements that were clean and practiced and left no room for the trembling she could feel waiting at the edge of her composure. "Tell me about Havoc," she said as she worked. "Tell me what he can do." Liam watched her prepare the medication with the focused attention of someone who was evaluating her competence and had found the results satisfactory. He was trained in Belgium, he said, 8 years active duty, 2 deployments in theater, 1 hostage extraction, 1 direct action op that I am not at liberty to describe even now. A pause. He has a bite force of 1,200 pounds per square inch. He can outrun a human being in any conditions. He reads chemical changes in the air, fear, adrenaline, the specific compounds produced by a person who is preparing to act violently. He paused again. He has never once been wrong. "He knew about the IV bag," Clara said. "Not a question." "He knew when we came through the door," Liam said. "He just didn't know what specifically. He was telling me the room was wrong. I should have acted on it faster." Clara administered the norepinephrine push and watched the monitor. 10 seconds. 15. The number on the screen began slowly, stubbornly to climb. 88/52, not good, but better than dying. "He's not going to like what I have to say next," Liam said. She looked up from the monitor. "Who?" "Havoc." He was looking at the dog. "I need to send him out." Havoc's head turned immediately. His ears came fully forward. "Havoc," Liam's voice was very quiet. "Seek." The dog looked at him for a long moment, and Clara could have sworn in that moment that something passed between them that had nothing to do with commands or training and everything to do with 9 years of shared survival. And then Havoc turned to the door, pressed his nose to the gap at the bottom, pulled 1 breath in, and looked back at Liam. "Going," Liam said. Clara opened the door 6 inches. Havoc was through it in less than 1 second, low and fast and absolutely silent. And then the corridor was empty, and the door swung shut, and the room contracted around the 2 of them like something holding its breath. 3:37. "He'll find the man in the corridor," Liam said. "He'll track the second one too if he's still in the building." He shifted on the gurney, jaw tightening, and She could see what it cost him. How's my pressure? 90/56, climbing. Good enough. He looked at the door. Clara, what do you know about the prep tech, the one they called Oren? Nothing beyond what Dale said. 3 weeks, night shift, she thought. He would have had access to every supply cart on this floor. He would have known which bay they'd use for a trauma incoming. He had time to... She stopped. Something had connected in the back of her mind like a key finding a lock, and the sound it made, there was not good. The coffee, she said. Liam looked at her sharply. I couldn't remember where I put my coffee cup tonight. I never lose track of things. She looked at her hands. If he got to your IF bag, he may have gotten to... Don't finish that, Liam said. His voice was very quiet and very certain. If he dosed you, you'd already be symptomatic. You're not. Your hands are steady, your cognition is clear, you caught the bag, you're fine. He held her gaze. He needed you functional. He needed someone to take primary on my case that he could watch and predict. You were the variable he hadn't counted on. What do you mean? You're new to this hospital, he said. 3 weeks ago, when this was being planned, you weren't here yet. Something shifted in his expression. He didn't know you were going to be the one standing at that IV pole tonight. The weight of that took a moment to settle. Clara breathed through it. So I wasn't part of the plan. No, Liam said. You weren't. She looked at him steadily. Is that good or bad? He almost smiled again. Honestly, I'm not sure yet. A sound from the corridor stopped both of them. Not loud, not dramatic. A single sharp impact, the sound of a body meeting a wall, and then silence, and then the very fast sound of footsteps, 2 sets moving away toward the far end of the corridor. Then nothing. 3:41. Clara and Liam looked at the door for a full 10 seconds without speaking. Then Liam said very quietly, Havoc found someone. How do you know it wasn't Havoc who hit the wall? Because he said with the patient certainty of a man stating a law of physics, in 9 years, Havoc has never been the one who hit the wall. Clara moved to the window. The corridor was empty in both directions. No Havoc, no dark jacket, no sign of anything except the flat fluorescent light and the distant sound of the hospital breathing around them. Her radio crackled. She grabbed it fast. Static. Then Sandra's voice, tight and strange. Clara, there is a man at my station. He is not a patient. He is asking for the location of Trauma Bay 1, and he has the transmission cut, not faded, cut. The hard digital silence of a signal interrupted deliberately. Clara looked at Liam. He was already sitting fully upright on the gurney, IVs pulling against his arm, blood pressure monitor alarming softly at the movement. His face was set and focused and completely without hesitation. Get me to the Freitag corridor, he said. You cannot walk. I know that, He looked at her. But I can direct. And right now Sandra is at that nurse's station alone and the man at her desk knows exactly where we are. He paused. They are not here for me anymore, Clara. They have been here long enough, and enough has gone wrong with their plan that now they are willing to take anyone. Clara stood at the edge of a decision. She was a nurse. She had 11 years of keeping people in beds, in rooms, in the safe contained geometry of the hospital's systems and protocols and procedures. She was not a soldier. She was not trained for this. She had never fired a weapon in her life, and she had a patient in early septic shock who was telling her to push him through a dark corridor toward an armed man. She thought of Sandra's voice on the radio, tight and strange and cut off. She unlocked the wheels of the gurney. You navigate, she said. I push. Liam looked at her for one moment with an expression she would think about for a very long time afterward. Then he said, Havoc will find us. He always does. Clara pushed the door open and moved them both into the corridor, and the dark of the hospital closed around them like a held breath, finally released. 3:42 in the morning. The corridor was not dark the way a room goes dark when someone turns off a light. It was dark the way a place goes dark when the darkness is intentional. The emergency strips along the base of the walls, throwing just enough pale amber to see the floor directly beneath your feet, and nothing beyond arm's reach on either side. Clara pushed the gurney through it with both hands, and her jaw set, and her eyes moving constantly, and the only sounds were the soft roll of the wheels and Liam's breathing, and the distant structural groaning of a hospital that was very large and very old and completely indifferent to what was happening inside it. "Basta left," Liam said. Quiet, flat. The voice he used for directions had a different quality than everything else he said, stripped of all inflection, purely functional. The voice of someone who had given instructions in the dark enough times that his body had built a separate register for it. 30 feet. There's a junction. Don't stop at the junction. Why not? Because stopping at a junction is how you get flanked. Clara did not stop at the junction. She pushed them through it fast, the gurney wheels chattering slightly over the seam in the floor where two corridor sections met, and she felt rather than heard the space open up on both sides for exactly 3 seconds before the walls closed back in around them. Liam's hand was on the gurney rail, not gripping, just resting. She realized he was using it to feel the vibration of the wheels reading the floor through his palm, the way a blind man reads a page. "Sandra," Clara said, keeping her voice low. "We need to get to Sandra. We need to get to Sandra without walking into the man who was standing at her desk," Liam said. "Those are two different problems. Can Havoc find her?" "Havoc is tracking the man in the corridor. If I pull him off that now, we lose the position." He paused. "How far is the nurse's station from here?" 90 feet, maybe 100, past the medication room on the right. "Is there a secondary access staff door service entrance? Anything that comes at the station from the east side instead of straight on?" Clara thought. "There's a linen access. It runs behind the station on the east wall. Staff use it to restock. It's not a full corridor. It's a narrow pass-through, maybe 4 feet wide." "Does it have a door at the station end?" "A panel, push-through, no lock." "That's how we come in," he said, "not from the front." 344. Clara angled the gurney left at the next branch, taking the longer route, the one that added 40 seconds, but kept them out of the main corridor. She could hear her own pulse in her ears. Not from fear, she told herself, or not only from fear, from the specific physical effort of pushing 220 pounds of man and steel gurney across linoleum flooring at a pace that was fast enough to matter and quiet enough not to announce them. "Liam," she said low, "how are you feeling?" "Define feeling." "Conscious, functional, not dying." 2 out of 3, he said. She looked at him over the top of the gurney. He was sitting upright, right arm braced on the rail, and his color was bad, the pallor of a man whose body was burning everything it had left on something other than maintaining appearances. The norepinephrine was holding him but barely, and she knew without checking the monitor that the number it would show her right now was not a number she would find comforting. "You need fluids," she said. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Fluids can wait 5 minutes. That is medically..." "Clara." He looked at her directly and his voice did not rise, but it stopped her completely. "I have operated at lower function than this in conditions that were considerably worse, and I am still here. I will still be here in 5 minutes. I need you to trust that." She breathed. "Okay. Thank you." They moved through the junction behind the medication room, and that was where Clara heard it. A sound from ahead, not footsteps. Something softer, the specific compressed sound of a person trying not to make a sound and not entirely succeeding. She stopped the gurney without being told. Liam held up one hand, 2 fingers extended. He pointed forward and then angled left. Then he made a slow circular motion with his wrist. Someone moving, coming around. Clara looked at the medication room door on her right. She made a decision in under 2 seconds. She pushed the gurney through the door fast, and the door swung shut behind them, and they were in the medication room in the dark, and she pressed her back against the door and did not breathe. Footsteps in the corridor. One person. Unhurried. Confident. The steps came level with the door. Paused. Clara felt the weight of those 3 seconds in the center of her chest like something held underwater. Then the steps moved on past the door, down the corridor, and faded. Neither of them spoke for 10 full seconds. Then Liam said very quietly, "That was not security." "Nah," Clara agreed. "Security walks differently. They have radios. They check doors." He paused. That man walked like someone who already knew what was behind every door. "Oren," she said, or someone Oren briefed. He shifted on the gurney jaw, tightening against whatever that movement cost him. They have a floor plan. They have been here long enough to memorize it. He looked at the door. We have maybe 2 minutes before he comes back through and checks the rooms. 3:47. Can you stand on one leg, Clara asked, for 30 seconds, just to get through the linen pass-through? The gurney won't fit. Liam looked at her. He looked at the distance between the gurney and the door she was indicating at the far end of the medication room. He made the same kind of calculations she had watched him make repeatedly in the last 20 minutes, clean, fast, unsentimental, and said, yes, but I need your shoulder. She brought the gurney alongside the far door. She positioned herself at his left side. His arm came across her shoulders, and when he transferred his weight off the gurney, the sound that came from him was brief and controlled and told her everything she needed to know about how much it cost. She did not react to it. She simply took the weight and moved. They went through the linen pass-through in 18 seconds. It was tight and it was hot, and at one point Liam's free hand found the wall, and she felt him tremble once, just once before he locked it down. On the other side, the panel pushed out into the rear of the nurse's station, and Clara got him onto the supply stool in the corner before either of them looked up. Sandra Morrow was seated at the station desk. She was not injured. She was sitting with her hands flat on the desk in front of her and her eyes forward in the rigid, specific stillness of someone who had been told very clearly not to move. The man standing 6 feet away from her was not the man from the dark jacket in the waiting room. He was younger, lighter, with a face that would not stand out in any crowd, which Clara understood immediately was the point. In his right hand, held low and deliberate, was a small black handgun pointed at the floor in the direction of Sandra's feet. He had not heard them come through the panel. For the span of 2 full seconds, no one in that room moved. Then Sandra's eyes found Clara's over the man's shoulder, and the relief in them was so complete and so raw that it hit Clara like a physical impact. And it was that impact, that specific and human thing, that made her move before she had decided to move. Hey, she said. The man turned, fast. The gun came up. And Havoc came through the corridor entrance to the nurse's station at a full run, silent and completely committed, and hit the man in the chest before the gun had finished rising. And the impact was not like anything Clara had ever seen outside of footage she had watched once in a training video about working dogs and immediately wished she could unwatch. The man went down. The gun left his hand. Havoc's jaw found the wrist and stayed, and the sound the man made was not something Clara would describe out loud to anyone who asked her about this night, but she would hear it in quiet moments for a very long time. Havoc, hold. Liam's voice from the corner of the station was absolutely flat and absolutely precise. Havoc held. 3:51. Sandra made a sound that was not quite a word and stood up from the desk. Clara reached her in 3 steps and put both hands on her shoulders and felt the trembling running through her like current. You're okay, Clara said. Look at me, Sandra. You're okay. Sandra looked at her. Her eyes were wet and her jaw was shaking, and she said, There's another one. He went toward the east stairwell. He said if the first one didn't, he said, How long ago? Clara asked. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Liam said from the corner, East stairwell goes to the basement. Clara looked at him. He had both hands on the edge of the desk, now holding his own weight, and the color of his face told her they were out of the window she had been trying to protect. She crossed to him, got her shoulder back under his arm, and said very quietly so Sandra would not hear, Your pressure. I know. Liam. I know, Clara. He looked at her steadily. The man in the east stairwell is going to the freight corridor. That's the exit route they planned. If he gets out, everything that happened in this building tonight disappears with him. The tampered bag, the breach, all of it. He paused. I need to not let that happen. You need to be horizontal and attached to a proper IV line. Yes, he agreed. After. She wanted to argue. She had 11 years of very well-developed instincts about when a patient was past negotiation and needed to be overruled by the person holding the medical degree. But Liam Reed was looking at her with those gray-level eyes, and what she saw behind them was not stubbornness or denial, it was clarity. A man who understood exactly what his body was doing and had made a precise and conscious decision about what he was going to spend the last of it on. She adjusted her grip on his arm and said, Then we move fast. 3:53. Sandra, Clara said over her shoulder. Secure this man, as the trauma restraints from the crash cart, the nylon ones, both wrists to the base of the desk. Then call 911 from the desk phone, not the radio. Tell them you have a shooting situation and a critical patient and you need police and a trauma team simultaneously. She paused. And Sandra, stay at this desk. Do not move from this desk. Sandra nodded. Her hands had stopped shaking. Clara had always believed that people were more capable in crises than they imagined themselves to be, and watching Sandra reach for the restraints with steady hands confirmed it in a way that made something loosen slightly in her chest. They moved. Liam's weight was considerable, and he was operating on reserve, and they both knew it, and what Clara felt as she moved him through the corridor toward the east stairwell was not exactly fear and not exactly determination, but something that lived between the two, a state she had no precise name for, where the body is running on something purer than adrenaline, and the mind has gone very, very quiet. Havoc moved ahead of them. The dog had resumed his working pattern without being told, low, fast, checking each intersection before they reached it, his head moving in that systematic sweep that Clara had stopped registering as animal behavior and started registering as something she was grateful for, in the way she was grateful for good light and solid ground. The east stairwell door was propped open with a rubber wedge. Clara saw that before she saw anything else, and it told her everything. Someone had planned to come back through this door quickly. Someone who expected to be running. He's in the basement, Liam said. Still, if he'd already gone out, he'd have pulled the wedge. How do you know? Because you always pull the wedge when you leave. It's the difference between an exit and a door that tells everyone which way you went. He looked at the stairwell. He's waiting for something, a signal, a time. Or for the man at the nurse's station to confirm the job was done, Clara said. But Liam looked at her. Yes. And that confirmation is not coming. No, he said, it is not. He straightened, pulling slightly more of his own weight, and Clara felt the shift and matched it. He is going to realize in the next few minutes that the plan has failed. When that happens, he will have two options: abandon the exit and improvise, or go ahead and move. Which will he choose? Depends on his training, Liam said. If he is professional, he improvises. If he is simply hired, he panics and runs. He paused. The potassium chloride in the IV bag was professional. The man at the nurse's station was not. So 2 different levels, Clara said. 2 different sources, Liam corrected. Someone at the top who is careful. Someone at the bottom who is not. He looked at the stairwell door. The man in the basement is one of the careful ones. 357. They went down the stairs with Havoc 3 steps ahead, and Clara taking as much of Liam's weight as the narrow stairwell allowed, and the heat from the basement rose to meet them. Before they reached the bottom, the thick pressurized warmth of boilers and pipes and the industrial infrastructure of a building that had been running continuously for 40 years. Havoc stopped at the bottom of the stairs. His body went rigid. He did not look back at Liam. He looked forward into the basement, and the sound he made was the lowest Clara had heard from him. Barely audible, felt more in the sternum than heard in the ear. Liam put his mouth close to Clara's ear. He's close. Very close. Clara looked into the basement. The emergency lighting here was worse than upstairs, single strips running along the ceiling center, leaving everything to either side in deep shadow. She could see the boiler units, the laundry infrastructure, the row of freight shelving along the far wall. She could see the freight elevator door on the left side, its panel lit amber, indicating it was on this floor. She could see a man standing beside the freight elevator with a phone to his ear and his back to them. She could hear very faintly the sound of the call not connecting. The man lowered the phone. He stood very still for a moment. She watched his shoulders rise and fall, when slowly the controlled breath of someone recalibrating. Then his right hand moved toward his jacket. Liam's grip on her shoulder tightened, not painfully, a communication. Clara leaned slightly back against him and said at full conversational volume, "Captain Reed, your blood pressure is 60/40. I need you to sit down right now." The man at the elevator spun, and in the half second that he was turning, Havoc moved. What happened next lasted 4 seconds. Clara counted them afterward the way she counted things in trauma situations, not for accuracy, but because counting kept the part of her brain that processed shock from overwhelming the part that needed to function. 4 seconds. The man's gun came up. Havoc was already inside the range where a gun was useful. The man's arm went one direction and the gun went another, and the man went to the ground with Havoc's weight on top of him, and Liam said hold from the bottom of the stairs in exactly the same voice he had used upstairs, and Havoc held. Clara crossed the basement in 12 steps. She reached the gun first, kicked it hard and far under the boiler unit, where neither she nor anyone else would be reaching it quickly, and then she turned to the man on the ground and said in the voice she used when a patient was doing something that was going to hurt them, and she needed them to stop immediately, do not move. The man did not move. 4:01 in the morning. Liam had made it to the frayed shelf against the wall and was seated on the lowest rung with both hands gripping the metal and his head bent forward slightly. And when Clara reached him and found the pulse at his wrist, it was thready and too fast, and she said his name once, quietly. He looked up. His eyes were still clear, still focused, still entirely himself. "We got him, he said. "Yes," she said, "and now you are going to let me do my job." He looked at her for a moment, then slowly he nodded. From upstairs, distant but growing, came the sound she had been waiting for, multiple sets of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, and the specific crackle of police radios carrying down through the stairwell, like the first clean air after a room full of smoke. Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. 1 second to feel the relief move through her before she set it aside and went back to work. Havoc moved from the man on the ground to Liam's side in 3 steps. He sat. He pressed his flank against Liam's leg and stayed there warm and solid and completely still, and Liam's hand came down and found the dog's head without looking. "Good boy," he said quietly. It was the first time Clara had heard those words from him since they came through the emergency bay doors. And something about the way he said it, the same absolute certainty, the same unshakable weight, but softer, worn smooth by years of being set in the dark at the end of very bad nights, made her throat tighten in a way she was not prepared for. She pressed her fingers against Liam's wrist and counted his pulse and listened to the police coming down the stairs and thought about the IV bag she had pulled from his arm in Trauma Bay 1, about the 11 minutes it had run, about what 11 minutes might mean and what she still did not know about what had been in it. She had stabilized him. She had moved him through a hospital that had been turned into a hunting ground and kept him alive and upright through 20 minutes that should have killed them both. But the infection was still in his blood. The wound was still open, and whatever had been in that bag was still an unknown, and unknowns in medicine were the thing that killed people quietly after the dramatic part was over, when everyone had started to believe the worst was behind them. Clara looked at Liam. He was still conscious, still focused, still holding on. She looked at Havoc. The dog was watching her face with those dark, patient eyes, and she had the same feeling she'd had upstairs, the sense of something behind them that knew more than it was supposed to. "I have to get you back upstairs," she said. Liam lifted his head. "I know. You're not out of this yet, medically, the infection." "I know, Clara." He met her eyes, not dismissive, not weary. Something more specific than either of those things, the look of a man who had survived enough to understand that survival was not a single moment, but a series of them, each one requiring a different kind of endurance. "Tell me what we need to do next." She squared her shoulders. She was already planning, already moving through the steps in her mind, the labs she needed, the imaging, the antibiotic regimen, the careful, painstaking work of pulling a body back from the edge by inches. "We go up," she said, "and we start from the beginning." He nodded once. She got her shoulder under his arm. Havoc rose and moved to his left side without being told, pressing close, taking what weight a dog can take from a man, which is less than people imagine, but more than nothing. They moved toward the stairs, the three of them, and above them, the police radios crackled, and the lights of the hospital burned on indifferent and constant the way hospitals always did, whether the people inside them were dying or fighting or both at once. 4:03 in the morning. The police came down the stairs the way police always came into a situation they had been told about: secondhand, fast, loud weapons drawn, operating on information that was 40 seconds old and therefore already incomplete. Clara heard them before she saw them, and she stepped into the center of the stairwell, landing with both hands visible and her ID badge held outward, and said very clearly, "Nurse Clara Jenkins, St. Jude Memorial. I have a critical patient at the base of the stairs and a secured suspect in the basement. I need a medical team down here right now, and I need someone to take custody of the man on the floor before my dog decides the situation has changed." The lead officer, a broad man with a gray mustache, and the particular expression of someone who had responded to enough calls that almost nothing surprised him, anymore looked past her at Liam on the stairs, then at Havoc pressed against Liam's side, then at the man on the basement floor who had not moved since Clara told him not to. "Ma'am," the officer said, "are you injured?" "No, he is." She gestured at Liam. "Septic wound, 4 days infected blood pressure that I need to stop talking about and start treating. I need a gurney down here, and I need it in the next 2 minutes." The officer keyed his radio. Clara turned back to Liam. He was still upright, still conscious, but the quality of his consciousness had shifted in the last 3 minutes in a way that Clara recognized and did not like. The eyes still focused, but the focus now requiring visible effort, the way a signal stays clear right up until the moment it doesn't. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist. His pulse was 94, thready, irregular at the edges. "Talk to me," she said. "Still here," he said. "I need more than that." "Nausea," he said. "Started on the stairs. Vision sharp, but the edges are doing something they shouldn't." He paused. "The infection." "Yes," she said. "The infection." She kept her voice level. "The antibiotics we started before everything went sideways, your body hasn't had long enough with them. The sepsis is still spreading, and until I get your labs back and find out what was in that IV bag, I cannot be certain what I'm treating or how fast it's moving." He looked at her. "How bad is the window?" She answered him the way she had decided somewhere in the basement that she would answer him honestly without softening, because he was a man who had built his entire survival on clear information, and false comfort would only cost him. "Narrow," she said, "but open. You're still on the right side of it." "Then let's stay there," he said. 407A, the gurney came down the stairwell in pieces reassembled at the bottom by 2 EMTs who moved with the efficient, slightly grim competence of people recalled from a break to handle something that had escalated past the original dispatch. Clara helped transfer Liam without being asked and ran her verbal handoff, simultaneously wound History Vitals timeline, the contaminated IV bag she had flagged, and sealed the norepinephrine push, the antibiotic line still running in his right arm. The younger EMT, a woman with her hair pulled back tight, listened without interrupting and then said, "The bag you flagged, do you have it?" "Sealed in my jacket pocket," Clara said, "labeled with time and my initials. It goes directly to the lab and directly to the police at the same time. Do not let those 2 things get separated." The woman nodded. "You've done this before." "Not this specifically," Clara said, "but close enough." Havoc walked beside the gurney up every stair without being told, without hesitating, without looking anywhere other than Liam's face. One of the police officers moved to intercept the dog at the top of the stairwell, and the officer who had spoken to Clara said very quickly, "Don't." The first officer looked at him. "Just don't," he repeated, and stepped aside, and Havoc passed through without breaking stride. 413. Back in Trauma Bay 1, Clara worked with the focused, slightly ferocious efficiency of someone reclaiming ground. She got Liam back onto the table, got a fresh IV running from a sealed bag. She opened herself from the locked crash cart, one that had not been touched that she could account for, and pulled a second blood culture, a metabolic panel, a lactic acid level. She rechecked the wound and did what she should have done 40 minutes ago, before the building had become a situation that required a different skill set entirely. Dr. Hale reappeared in the doorway at 4:16, still gloved from the pediatric wing, where he had apparently remained for the duration. He looked at Liam on the table at Havoc against the wall at the police officer stationed outside the bay door, and at Clara, who was not looking at him because she was reading a monitor. "I need to take over primary," he said. "You can co-manage," she said. "His lactic acid is going to come back high. I want to discuss the antibiotic coverage before we see the number." Hale blinked. "You want to discuss?" "Yes." She looked at him now directly with the specific calm of a woman who had spent the last 40 minutes keeping a man alive through conditions that were not covered in any hospital protocol she had ever read. He was in the field for 4 days with an open wound and inadequate dressing changes. He was exposed to environmental contaminants we haven't identified. The infecting organism could be gram-negative, could be polymicrobial, and we have an additional unknown substance that was introduced into his first IV line and has been partially absorbed. She held Hale's gaze. So yes, I want to discuss coverage before we commit to a regimen and find out 2 hours from now that we guessed wrong. Hale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Pull up the formulary." Clara almost said something. She decided not to. She pulled up the formulary. 419. Liam was watching them. He had been watching the exchange with the patient, tracking attention of a man who understood that the argument happening over his body was the argument that determined whether his body kept going. When Clara moved to the monitor, he said quietly, "The bag, the one you pulled, do you know yet?" "The lab has it," she said. 20 minutes for a preliminary screen." "What's your read?" he said. She looked at him. "Potassium chloride," she said. "Possibly in combination with something that would slow his metabolism and make the cardiac effects harder to detect and harder to reverse." She paused. Whoever made that choice knew pharmacology. This was not improvised. Liam closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "No," he said when he opened them. "It never is." "Is there anyone who knew you might end up here, at this hospital specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. She could see him working through something, not reluctance, but the specific careful process of someone who had spent years thinking about operational security and was now applying it to a question that had a very personal answer. "One person," he said finally, "a man named Victor Carreño, former intelligence. We worked together for 6 years. He paused. "He knew my medical history. He knew which hospital in this city had the trauma rating to handle my leg." Another pause longer. "We had a falling out 18 months ago. I found out he had been passing information about operations, past operations, people who served in them, to contractors who were not government aligned." Clara looked at him steadily. "And instead of going public with that, I gave him the opportunity to correct it," Liam said. "I gave him 60 days. His jaw tightened. He used those 60 days to plan instead." The weight of that settled in the room. Clara felt it land in her chest and stay there, heavy and specific, the particular grief of a betrayal that has had 18 months to grow roots before it finally broke through the surface. "He sent them," she said. "Yes. All of them. The man in the waiting room, the one they called Oren, the men in the corridor." "Yes. He sent 3 people to kill you." "4, Zinena," Liam said. "There were 4. The man in the waiting room, Oren, the man at Sandra's desk, and the man in the basement. 4 separate roles: entry preparation, contingency, and extraction." He paused. "Victor always planned in 4s. He said a 3-point plan had 1 point too few to be reliable." Clara thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "The man in the waiting room, the one who Havoc first alerted to, he was never found." The silence that followed that sentence was of a different quality than all the silences before it. Liam looked at her. His face had gone very still. "No," he said. "He wasn't." 4:22. Clara crossed to the bay door and 4 steps and opened to shoot it. The police officer outside turned. "The first suspect," she said, "the man who was in the waiting room before the patient was admitted. Dark jacket, male 40 to 50, no check-in paperwork. What is his status?" The officer's expression told her the answer before he spoke. "We have no individual in custody matching that description," he said carefully. "The waiting area was cleared when we arrived. Everyone present was identified and—" "He was there before you arrived," Clara said. "He was there when I first came on shift. He sat in the corner and he did not move, and he was the first person Havoc alerted to when we came through those doors." She looked at the officer. "He is still in this building." The officer keyed his radio immediately. Clara went back into the bay. She looked at Havoc. The dog was looking at her. His ears were forward but not fully pointed, which she had learned in the last hour meant he was tracking something at a distance rather than something proximate. "He's still here," she said to Liam. "The first one." Liam did not look surprised. He looked like a man whose model of the situation had just been confirmed in a way he had been hoping it wouldn't be. "He's the anchor," Liam said. "The others were the operation. He's the oversight. He's here to confirm the result and report back. Report back to Carreño. Yes. Which means Carreño doesn't know yet that the operation failed. Liam looked at her, and in his expression, she saw something she had not seen from him once in the entire night. Not fear, not pain, not calculation, but something that was almost hope. Careful and specific and held very tightly, but there. If Carreño doesn't know, Liam said slowly, then he hasn't run. Clara understood immediately. He's still reachable. He's still reachable, Liam said. And if the anchor in this building reports back that the operation succeeded, you need the anchor alive, she said, and you need him to make contact before he realizes anything went wrong. Clara, Liam was sitting up straighter despite everything his body was telling him. Get me a phone, not the hospital line, a cell phone personal, something that is not on a recorded system. She pulled her own phone from her scrub's pocket and held it out. Yeah, he took it with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. I need 5 minutes and I need the police radio off in this room. She looked at the officer in the doorway. He shook his head slightly. She looked at Liam. He was looking at the phone. This is the man who sent 4 people to kill me in a hospital, Liam said quietly to no one in particular. He has done this before. He will do it again. And right now, for exactly the next few minutes, we have something we have never had before. He looked up, the element of surprise. The officer held his gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped fully into the doorway and turned his radio down. 4:26. Clara watched Liam work the phone with the focused economical movements of someone who had run operations in the dark with less than this and made them hold. She could not hear who he called or what was said. She could see his face calm, deliberate, precise, and she could see Havoc watching him with that absolute unblinking loyalty that she had stopped trying to find adequate words for. She turned to the monitor and read his vitals while he talked. Blood pressure holding at 94/61. Pulse irregular but not deteriorating. Temperature still elevated but not climbing. The infection was still in him, like something with its own agenda working steadily through his blood, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last hour. She thought about what 11 minutes of that IV had already put into him. She thought about the lab. She thought about the antibiotic regimen she and Hale had agreed on and whether it was going to be enough or just enough to feel like enough, which were two very different things. She thought about the man still somewhere in this building, watching, waiting, holding information that could end this or extend it depending on which way the next few minutes fell. Liam said something short and quiet into the phone and ended the call. He held it for a moment, looking at the screen. Then he held it back out to Clara. Done, he said. What did you do? I called someone who can use the anchor to find Carreño before he knows to move. He looked at her. It will take 6 hours, maybe 8. And until then, he said, I need you to do what you came here to do. She looked at him. He looked back at her with those gray, clear, exhausted eyes. And what she saw in them fully and plainly for the first time since 3:26 in the morning was not a soldier or a captain or a man who had trained himself past the point where most people thought the human body could go. It was a person, sitting on an emergency room table at 4:26 in the morning with an infection in his blood and a dog pressed against his side and the specific unguarded vulnerability of someone who has been strong for so long that finally admitting they need help feels like putting down something they have carried until it has left marks. Lie back, she said. He lay back. Havoc shifted position, moving to the foot of the gurney, sitting with his back to Liam's legs and his face toward the door. Clara recognized the posture she had seen it 3 times tonight in 3 different rooms. It was the posture of an animal that had finished one task and was already holding the perimeter for the next one. The patience of something that understood in a way that required no words and no explanation, that the work was not finished, would not be finished, and that finishing it was the only acceptable outcome. The lab results came back at 4:31. Clara read them at the station outside the bay, alone standing very straight with the printout in both hands. The lactic acid was high, 4.2, significantly above the threshold that confirmed what she had already known. The inflammatory markers were elevated across the board, and the tox screen on the IV bag showed 2 substances in combination, potassium chloride as she had suspected, in a calcium channel blocker at a concentration that, combined with the potassium in Liam's already compromised cardiovascular status from blood loss, would have produced a cardiac arrest within 15 minutes that would have looked to any physician without specific reason to look further, like a consequence of the sepsis rather than its cause. 15 minutes. He had been on that bag for 11. Clara stood into the corridor and breathed for 4 seconds. Just 4. Then she folded the printout, put it in her pocket, and walked back into the bay. "I have your results," she said. Liam turned his head to look at her. "The combination in that bag," she said, keeping her voice level, "was designed to look like your body gave out from the infection." She held his gaze. "You had 4 minutes left when I pulled that line." He was quiet for a long moment. She watched something move through his face, not fears she had established by now that fear was not a thing Liam Reed produced in any conventional way, but something older and more specific. The reckoning of a man who has just been told exactly how close the margin was and is deciding what to do with that information. 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes, she confirmed. He looked at Havoc. Havoc was still facing the door, still holding his position, still doing the only thing he knew how to do, which was stand between his person and whatever was coming next. "He knew," Liam said quietly. "When we came through the door, he knew the room was wrong." "Yes," Clara said, "and I didn't act on it fast enough. You were losing blood and fighting sepsis and had just driven for 3 days straight," she said. "I would call that adequate mitigation." He almost smiled. The shadow of it anyway, the particular expression she had started to recognize as the closest he allowed himself to something genuine and unguarded. "You have a very specific way of delivering information," he said. 11 years, she said. "You learn what works." She began adjusting the antibiotic drip, the proper one, the one she had argued hail, into the broader coverage that accounted for 4 days of field contamination and an unknown exposure profile. She worked methodically, precisely the way she always worked when the immediate crisis had passed and the longer, quieter work of actual medicine had taken back over. At 4:39, one of the police officers knocked on the bay door and said they had located the man in the dark jacket. He had been found in the hospital chapel on the 2nd floor, seated in the back row, phone to his ear. He had not completed the call. He was in custody. Clara relayed this to Liam without editorializing. Liam said, "Good." Then after a moment, "That means Carreño's window is closing." "Good," Clara said. She checked the monitor. His pressure was holding. His pulse was steadying slowly, like something finding its own rhythm after a long interruption. The fever was still there, but the trajectory had changed, not climbing, not dropping, but holding, which was the first thing she had asked of it and the thing she intended to build from. She pulled the stool to the side of the gurney and sat. Not because she was tired, though she was, but because she had been on her feet in this room and in the corridor and in the basement and on the stairs for over an hour, and the work now was the kind that required proximity and patience rather than movement, and she allowed herself for the first time since 3:26 to be still. Havoc turned from the door. He looked at her. Then he walked to the side of the gurney opposite where she sat, lay down and put his head on his front paws, watching the door from a lower angle. Still watching, still working. "Does he ever stop?" she asked. "No," Liam said. His voice was quieter now, not weaker, but lower, the voice of a man whose body was finally reluctantly beginning to accept the rest it had been refusing for 4 days. "He slows down. That's the closest he gets." "Like you," she said. A pause. "Like me," he agreed. She checked the monitor one more time. 98/64. Still not where she wanted it, but moving in the right direction, one number at a time, the way most things in medicine moved when they were moving right. She made a note. She reset the timer on the antibiotic. Somewhere in the city, in a place she didn't know the address of, a man named Victor Carreño was sitting with information that was already hours out of date, not yet knowing that the 4 people he had sent to a hospital at 3:26 in the morning had not come back. And in Trauma Bay 1, with the monitors running and the antibiotics dripping and a dog lying on the floor between them, like a warm and absolute certainty, Clara Jenkins settled in for the long work. The kind that doesn't make noise. The kind that no one outside the room ever fully sees. The kind that is when everything else has been stripped away, the only work that actually keeps people alive. 4:51 in the morning. The antibiotics had been running for 18 minutes when Liam's monitor alarmed. Not the soft advisory tone that meant a number had drifted outside a preferred range. The hard, sustained alarm that meant a number had moved past the range where preference was relevant. Clara was at the station outside reviewing his lab trend when she heard it, and she was through the bay door before the second pulse of the alarm had finished sounding. His heart rate was 142. His blood pressure had dropped to 71/44. He was conscious but barely, his eyes open and tracking, but the focus in them dimmed in a way that told her the part of him running on willpower had finally hit the wall that willpower could not climb. Liam, she was already at the monitor, already pulling the crash cart close with one hand. Stay with me. Right here. Eyes on me. Still here, he said. The words were slower than they had been. Still here. You are having a cardiac response, she said. She kept her voice the way she had kept it all night. Level clear, no drama, because drama was a luxury that belonged to people who were not responsible for what happened next. The calcium channel blocker that was in your IV, it is affecting your heart rate and your conduction. Your body is fighting it, but it needs help. She was already drawing the calcium gluconate, already calculating. This is going to feel strange. I need you to breathe through it. He looked at her. His jaw was set and his hands were flat on the gurney rails, but his eyes were clear enough that she could see him making the decision to trust her the same way she had seen him make every other decision tonight, fast, clean, committed. Do it, he said. As she pushed the calcium gluconate slow and steady and watched the monitor with the specific suspended attention of someone who has done everything right and is now waiting to find out if everything right is going to be enough. 15 seconds. 20. 30. The rate began to drop, not fast, not dramatically. One number at a time, the way Liam's blood pressure had climbed when she first gave him the norepinephrine, reluctant, stubborn, but moving. 131, 119, 108. Clara exhaled, one breath. Then she was back to work. Havoc had stood the moment the alarm sounded. He had not moved from his position at the foot of the gurney, but he was fully upright, fully alert, his eyes on Liam's face with an intensity that Clara had stopped trying to categorize as animal behavior, because it was something more specific than that. It was witness. The dog was bearing witness the way someone stands at the bedside of a person they love and refuses to look away because looking away would be its own kind of abandonment. 4:58. Liam's rate settled at 97, not perfect, acceptable. She adjusted the drip and made 3 notes, and when she looked up, he was watching her with eyes that were clearer than they had been 2 minutes ago, which was either the calcium working or the man simply refusing on a cellular level to go anywhere. You scared me, she said. She had not intended to say it. It came out anyway, the truth finding its own exit the way it always did at 4 in the morning after a night like this one. He looked at her. I scared myself, he said. Slightly. Only slightly. I've had worse. You keep saying that, she said, and it keeps being true, and I keep finding it alarming. He breathed. She watched his chest rise and fall, and thought about the calcium channel blocker still working its way through his system, still interfering with the electrical signals his heart used to organize itself. And she thought about the 11 minutes the bag had run, and she did the math again, even though she had already done it 4 times, and the answer was the same every time. 4 minutes. They had had 4 minutes. Clara, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, he said, not the 2 words he had said when she first told him Havoc could stay that had been relief. This was something different. This was the specific, considered gratitude of a man who understood precisely what he was thanking someone for and had chosen the moment deliberately. Not just for tonight, for the way you did it. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Don't thank me yet. You're not out of the woods. I know, he said, but I'm still in the woods, which is better than the alternative. 5:11. The shift changed at 6, which meant Clara had 49 minutes before the day team arrived, and she would have to hand off a patient who had arrived with a septic wound and become, over the course of 1 graveyard shift, something considerably more complicated than that. She used those 49 minutes the way she used every minute she had been given tonight without waste. She redrew his blood cultures. She repeated the lactic acid and watched the number come back at 3.1, still elevated, still serious, but down from 4.2, which was the direction she had asked for and had not entirely been certain she would get. She adjusted the antibiotic coverage based on the sensitivities starting to come back from the lab, narrowing toward the organism that was actually present rather than everything that might be. She documented everything, every decision, every timing, every number, with the particular thoroughness of someone who understood that what had happened in this hospital tonight was going to be reviewed by people she had not yet met, and she attended for those people to find no gaps. At 5:23, Detective Ann Marsh from the city's organized crime unit knocked on the bay door. She was a compact woman in her late 40s with short silver-streaked hair and eyes that moved through a room the way Clara's moved through a room reading cataloging filing. She identified herself, showed her badge, and said she needed 5 minutes with Captain Reed if he was in a condition to speak. Clara looked at Liam. Liam looked at the detective. "He can have 10, Liam said. Clara stepped outside. She stood in the corridor and listened to the hospital coming back to itself around her, the day shift beginning to filter in at the edges, the particular change in the quality of sound that came when a building's population started transitioning from the people who worked in the dark to the people who worked in the light. She thought about Sandra, who had been checked and released with nothing worse than shock and a badly shaken sense of what a normal Tuesday night looked like. She thought about Hale, who had managed the rest of the night with a professionalism she had been grateful for, and a silence on the subject of havoc that she had been even more grateful for. She thought about the man named Victor Carreño, somewhere in the city, not yet knowing. The detective came out at 5:31. She stopped beside Clara in the corridor and said, "You pulled his IV line." "Yes," Clara said. "At what point did you know it was compromised?" "When I held it up to the light and the fluid wasn't clear," Clara said. "But I suspected something was wrong before that. The patient's dog alerted when we entered the bay. I had already noted an individual in the waiting area who did not present as a patient or a visitor." She paused. "I could not have told you specifically what I was looking for. I just knew the room was wrong." The detective looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "That's what he said," she said. "Almost word for word." She paused. "The doctor." "He knew." "Yes," Clara said. "Captain Reed said the body knew before any of the rest of you did. That's why he asked you to let it stay." "That's correct." The detective nodded slowly, processing something. Then she said, "The individual you noted in the waiting area, the one who was found in the chapel, he made contact." She paused. "The contact he made was not to Carreño. It was to a federal task force handler. He was an undercover operative. He has been inside Carreño's network for 14 months. Clara stood very still. He was not one of them. "No," the detective said. "He was the reason we were able to move on Carreño at 5:07 this morning, before the network had any indication the hospital operation had failed." She looked at Clara carefully. "The reason he was in the waiting room tonight watching the entrance was because he had received intelligence that an attempt would be made on Captain Reed's life, and he was positioned to intervene if the timing allowed." Clara thought about the man in the dark jacket, the man who had not moved for 40 minutes, the man whose stillness she had read as predatory, and which had in fact been something else entirely, the stillness of someone watching, waiting, holding a position, not for violence, but for the moment when intervention became necessary. She thought about havoc alerting to him, and then she thought about something Liam had said in the basement: "He has never once been wrong." And she thought about what it meant that the bog had marked that man as a threat from across a waiting room, and what it meant that he had also later been the one to move through the corridor towards something that turned out to be real danger. 2 alerts, 2 different targets, both in their own way accurate. "He read the operative as a threat," she said slowly. "Yes," the detective said, "because the operative was armed and positioned and prepared to act. Yes, trained dogs don't distinguish between a person intending harm and a person prepared to cause harm in service of stopping it. The chemical signature is the same." She paused. "Captain Reed figured that out at approximately 3:45 this morning. He asked me to convey it to you." Clara thought about Liam at the bottom of the stairwell, saying the element of surprise, saying Carreño always planned in fours, saying the anchor was still in the building. She thought about the phone call he had made from her cell phone at 4:26, the short, quiet call that he had said would take 6 to 8 hours to matter. It had taken 41 minutes. Because he hadn't been calling someone. He had been calling the operative's handler directly. He had known who the man in the dark jacket was. He had known from the moment Havoc alerted and then recalibrated, the dog had flagged the man, then recalibrated to the actual threat in the corridor, the way a dog recalibrates when the first target is superseded by something more immediate. Liam had read that recalibration and known. He had known the whole time. He didn't tell me, Clara said. Not accusation, just the fact of it sitting in the open. No, the detective said. He said he couldn't. The fewer people who knew the operative's status, the longer the operative's cover held. Even by a few minutes. She paused. He also said, and I'm quoting directly, that you didn't need to know to do what you needed to do. And he was correct about that. Clara was quiet for a moment, then she said Victor Carreño. In custody as of 5/22, the detective said, 14 months of work, 14 months of an operative inside a network that has been responsible for the deaths of at least 6 former military personnel whose files were leaked by Carreño during his time in intelligence. She looked at Clara steadily. Tonight was the operation that gave us the window. The failure of the hospital attempt, the timing, the positioning, all of it. She paused. Captain Reed has been cooperating with this investigation for 9 months. Tonight was not an accident. It was in significant part deliberate. The corridor felt very quiet. Clara listened to the hospital breathing around her and absorbed what the detective had just said the way she absorbed difficult information in medicine, not resisting it, not rushing to react to it, just letting it settle until she understood its full shape. Liam had known Carreño would move. He had known or suspected strongly enough to act on it that an attempt would come. And he had driven himself to this specific hospital in this specific condition, with his blood pressure dropping and his wound 4 days infected, not only because he needed medical care, but because this was where the operative was positioned. This was where the window would open. He had come here to survive the attempt, and to make sure that when the attempt failed, the right people were close enough to close the door on Carreño before he could move. He had used himself as the bait and the wound as the cover story, and he had done it alone in a truck for 3 days before driving to an emergency room at 3 in the morning to ask a nurse he had never met if she could help him. Clara walked back into Trauma Bay 1. Liam was watching the door when she came in. He had the look of a man who had been thinking very specifically about what was going to come through it. When he saw her face, something in his expression shifted, not guilt exactly, but the careful attention of someone who knows they owe an explanation and is deciding how to give it. She pulled the stool to the side of the gurney and sat. She looked at him for a long moment. "You knew," she said. "Yes," he said. "The whole time." "Not every detail," he said. "I knew Carreño would move this week. I knew Marcus the operative was positioned here. I knew if I came in with a real wound and a real crisis, the attempt would happen in this building and on this night, and Marcus would be in a position to close the loop." He paused. "What I did not know was that they had gotten to the supply chain. The IV bag, that was not something I had planned for." "You nearly died from something you didn't plan for," she said. "Yes," he said, simply, without evasion. "You used yourself as bait." "I was already the target," he said. "I made the choice to be the target in a place where the outcome could be controlled rather than in a place where it couldn't." He looked at her steadily. "I did not intend for you to be involved in the way you were. You were not supposed to be the one standing at that ivy pole." "No," she said, "I wasn't part of the plan." "No," he agreed, "and that is the part of tonight that I will think about for a very long time." He held her gaze. "Because you were the part that actually worked." Clara looked at him. She thought about the IV bag she had held up to the light at 3:38 in the morning. She thought about the 11 minutes and the 4 minutes and the calcium gluconate at 4:51. She thought about Sandra's hands stopping their trembling and reaching for the restraints, about Havoc hitting the floor in the chapel corridor like something gravity had aimed personally, about pushing a 220-pound man on a gurney through a dark hospital at a pace that was fast enough to matter. She thought about the way Liam had looked at her in the basement when she squared her shoulders and said, "We go up and we start from the beginning." She thought about the fact that she had pulled the line at 3:38 and Victor Carreño had been in handcuffs by 5:22 and 6 former military personnel whose names she would never know had been the reason this had mattered, had been the reason Liam Reed had driven 3 days to a hospital in order to end something that should have been ended a long time ago. The people Carreño had killed, she said. The 6. Liam looked at the ceiling. Something crossed his face, old and specific, and carried for a long time. "I served with 3 of them," he said. "The other 3 I knew by name and record." He was quiet for a moment. "When I found out what Victor had done, when I gave him the 60 days and he used them to plan instead, I made a decision." His jaw tightened. "I decided that whatever it cost me personally was the correct price to pay." Clara did not say anything. Some things did not require a response. They required only to be heard by someone willing to hold them, and she was willing. Havoc stood up from the floor. He walked to the side of the gurney, put his chin on the rail beside Liam's hand, and stayed there. Not alert, not scanning, not working, just present. The dog leaning into the man's hand moving to the dog's head. Without looking, the 2 of them settling into a stillness that was different from all the other stillnesses of the night. Not the stillness of listening for threat, but the stillness of something that has come through and knows it. 5:44. Clara's replacement arrived at 5:58. Her name was Beth, a day shift nurse with 12 years on the floor who took the handoff with the focused professionalism of someone accustomed to receiving complicated nights in the space of a 10-minute verbal summary. Clara gave her everything: the vitals trend, the antibiotic rationale, the calcium gluconate push, and why, the detective's contact information, the specific note about the IV bag chain of custody, and who at the lab to call for the updated tox screen. She gave her everything except what it had felt like, because that was not clinical information, and Beth did not need it to do her job correctly. At 6:04, Clara stood at the bay door with her jacket and her badge, and the particular bone-deep tiredness of someone who had spent 7 hours running on something purer than sleep and is now finally coming down from it. Liam was watching her from the gurney. Beth was at the monitor on the far side. Havoc was at the foot of the gurney watching Clara the way he had watched her from the moment she first opened the trauma bay door, with that patient assessing specific attention that she had never fully gotten used to and suspected she was not meant to. "You should sleep," she said to Liam. "I know," he said. "I mean actually sleep, not the thing you've been doing for 4 days that you've been calling sleep." "I know," he said again. She looked at him for a moment. "You're going to be okay," she said. Not a comfort. She had never been in the business of comfort that wasn't grounded in something real. A clinical statement. The assessment of a nurse who had spent 7 hours reading this particular patient's body and had enough data now to make the call with confidence. "The infection is responding. Your heart is stabilizing. You made it to the right side of what this could have been. Because of you," he said. She shook her head. "Because you drove here instead of somewhere less equipped. Because you told me the dog could stay. Because you held on through 4 days and an hour in a basement in a cardiac event at 4:51. She paused. "I just did what I was trained to do." "So did Havoc," Liam said. "So did I. Doesn't make it less true." She looked at the dog. Havoc looked back at her with those dark, steady eyes. And she thought about what the detective had said, that trained dogs can't distinguish between someone intending harm and someone prepared to cause harm in service of stopping it, that the chemical signature is the same. She thought about what it meant that Havoc had recalibrated, that he had flagged the operative and then moved past him to the real threat, not because someone commanded him to, but because something in him had processed the information and made the adjustment, because he had read the room in a way that none of the humans in it could. "He's remarkable," she said. "Yes," Liam said, "he is." She picked up her jacket. She was almost through the door when Liam said her name. She turned. "When I'm out of here," he said, "I'd like to buy you coffee. Real coffee. Not whatever they have in that break room." He paused. "If that's something you'd agree to." She looked at him for a moment. at the man who had driven 3 days with a septic wound to close a chapter that needed closing, who had lain on a table in a dark hospital and trusted her with his life before he had any particular reason to, who had looked at her in a basement at 4 in the morning and said, "You do what you need to do and I'll trust that." "When you're out of here," she said, "and not before." He nodded. Something in his face settled, not relief, something quieter than that, something that looked like the beginning of being okay. That Clara Jenkins walked out of Trauma Bay 1 at 6:07 in the morning into a hospital that had come back fully to life around her lights at full power day shift voices in the corridors. The ordinary and relentless machinery of a place that existed to keep people alive, doing what it always did, indifferent to the extraordinary things that sometimes had to happen inside it in order for ordinary things to continue. She drove home in the early light with both hands on the wheel and the window down and the cool morning air moving through the car, and she did not turn on the radio because the quiet felt like something earned. Behind her in Trauma Bay 1, a man who had spent 9 months building a careful trap around a careful enemy lay in a hospital bed with an infection still working its slow retreat from his blood, with a dog pressed against his side, breathing steadily in sleep with a lactic acid trending down and a pulse trending towards something sustainable, and a window that had been 4 minutes wide and was now finally safely behind him. Victor Carreño was in a federal holding cell. 6 names had not been forgotten. A 14-month operation had closed at 5:22 on a Tuesday morning because a nurse had held an IV bag up to the light at 3:38 and seen something wrong in the clarity of the fluid and had pulled the line before the clock ran out. Some things are saved by soldiers, some things are saved by dogs, and some things are saved by the person standing at the pole at 4 in the morning who notices what no one else thought to look for and acts before the moment passes. That is not a small thing. It has never been a small thing. It just rarely gets the name it deserves.